Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Intro to Space. So, how fitting it is that currently I'm in the Space Lab on campus for the first episode. So, first up, I got asked an interesting question about why I said flies for a satellite and rocket. Well, first of all, here what we have is a model of a rocket made by a student. As you can see, it does not have any wings at all. So in space, you have very little air. So what happens is you have to travel fast enough. So what I mean by that is, here is a model of the Earth, quite small, and picture this as your satellite, this eraser. So what happens is, if you are able to fly fast enough around the Earth, the force of gravity will not bring you down. If you fly slow, gravity brings you down and you basically burn up in the atmosphere. So traveling fast in space is your best friend. All right, let's move on to the topic of today: the African Space Agency and the South African space arena. So in South Africa, who's in charge is the DSI, Department of Science and Innovation. They are in charge of basically how all the regulations that currently are around in South Africa and things like that. Underneath the DSI is SANSA. So that's our space agency for South Africa, the South African National Space Agency. And their job is to promote cooperation or space cooperation for all space-related activities. So they're in charge of 3 facilities in South Africa. So their main office is in Pretoria. The Space Operations Department is in Hartbeespoort, and the Space Science is actually in Hermanus, so just down the road here in Cape Town. So Hartbeespoort Space Operations is just you tracking and downloading data from satellites. So that's pretty much it. Space science is when essentially we have a magnetic, you can sort of control the magnetic fields within specific areas. That's sort of what they do there at the end of the day. Other facilities that we have in South Africa is the famous SKA, the Square Kilometer Array. We have the Meerkat, and we have SALT. So all 3 of these basically do the same thing, just more on a grander scale and looking at different parts of the sky. So that they all use radio telescopes. So you just basically look at space using radio waves and understanding and gathering data from that. Also, the satellites that South Africa has built over the last years, the famous one is Sumbandila Sat. That's what really started this all off, and the fact that we made it without having any current form of space activities is, well, the reason why we have this industry. The private sector is a small industry, but it does do a really good job going forward. So that was the first satellite. Then CPUT built ZA Cube 1 and ZA Cube 2. So what I mean by cube is something like this. So this is what we call a CubeSat. It's just a small little satellite that we can build for technology demonstrations or communications, just for students to be able to students to do. They do get bigger than this, but this is sort of like the smallest. This is about 1 kilogram, more or less. They can rise to, this satellites can go to the size of a car and some even buses, if you want to think of how big these things can get and how heavy they can get. And then the next satellite South Africa is currently building is EOSat-1. So that is due to launch next year. It's an Earth observation satellite. So it's supposed to take pictures of the surface of the Earth from space. So that should be launched sometime either early next year or late next year. The pandemic has sort of delayed some projects, but I think that one is still on course. Now moving on to the African Space Agency. So basically, we wanted to work more or less like ESA, the European Space Agency, where different countries have their own space agencies. But for the continent, we come together so we can all collaborate and bring our own skills for a specific mission for the continent that will help improve the continent. So, like maybe teleeducation or telemedicine. So, where you can send out broadcasts from space to different areas on the African continent and teaching and providing education or medicine expertise in rural areas or urban areas. It doesn't really matter. As long as they have access to it, that's one of the main things. So each country has different, or can bring different skills, but they're usually ranked according to three specifications. So one is countries that have been in space for a long time, so like Nigeria or South Africa. Two, countries who have just started out and they have their own space agency and they can build their own things. Partly they have part facilities and part no facilities. And three, countries who do not have the means to build these things themselves, but they can provide financial support. So how that all three will come together is basically how we want the African Space Agency to be. There's still a few things we have to work out. But there is one main thing is the headquarters for this agency is actually going to be in Egypt. So we have established that. The specific projects and the direction we want to go as a continent, that still has to be figured out and finalized, unfortunately. That's sort of a more of a political thing than it's more of a political thing, but it is being driven going forward. So other facilities that we need in Africa for the African space are basically launch facilities. It's currently 6, but none of them are being used. South Africa does have one. It sort of needs to be upgraded. So it was only used for testing launches, not really things going up into space. Kenya is probably the most developed one, built by the Italians a few years ago, well, many years ago actually, but it's not currently being used. Actually, none of them are currently being used, unfortunately, but they can be upgraded so that we can have our own launching facilities as a country. So by launching, I mean you're able to essentially build this, so each country can build a different part of this rocket, and you have a platform where the rocket can actually stand up and you can launch it up. That's basically a launch facility. It takes a lot of money and many years to build one, but if we come together as a continent, we can probably do it. Other things that other countries can contribute are different skills. So space can be broken down into 3 things: the launching facility, the operation of the things, and the data handling. So that's downloading the data from the satellites. Operating is moving the satellite around to do what you need it to do, and launching it is to take the satellite up into space. And these 3 things can be all intermingled and, well, can come together to actually make some really good quality things. The reason why we want to do it ourselves, even though it's super expensive, is because we need things specific to Africa. So we need solutions specific to Africa, built by Africans with an African mindset. That's it at the end of the day. Instead of relying on other countries to do the thinking for us and trying to provide their solutions to our unique solutions. And that's pretty much why we want to do these things ourselves. And that's the end of this video. So next week, I will talk more in depth about the space laws that govern all of these space agencies around the globe and the African continent, and how we can sort of contribute our own input towards that.